Marianne, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So it was great to see you speaking with the Starbucks employee. What was your experience talking to the young Starbucks workers about their movement?
Well, being at the Unity Fest, being around all of the young people and older people who were celebrating the wins, 7 stores, 7 Starbucks had agreed to unionize. It was wonderful. The kids, I call them, they're not, I mean, some of them are kids, some of them aren't really kids, but the entire sort of youth orientation of this reinvigoration of the labor movement is very inspiring. The thing that was most impactful for me in talking to the workers was how many of them talked about how they loved Starbucks. And I read from one of the letters from a New York organizer to Howard Schultz, and he said, this call is coming from inside the house. We're not outside agitators, as they used to be called. These are people who kept reiterating that they love working at Starbucks. They just want Starbucks to be better, that Starbucks used to be better. I thought that was very moving.
Is it Starbucks is putting their own union together, or are they trying? They're not trying to join another, like the retail union or the.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
They're doing an Amazon thing where they're putting together their own particular.
Yeah,
that's so exciting.
It is exciting because they are, you know, I think a lot of the millennials were at the effect of the propaganda initiated in the 1980s that somehow unions were bad for workers. It would disincentivize, or you'd actually get less. That, you know, obviously purposeful effort to squash unions still was having an effect even on a lot of millennials. But Gen Z doesn't seem to be buying it at all. They're just sort of past that. They know, you know, it's like, we know when we're being screwed and nothing you can say can make us change. And of course, a lot, whether it has to do with Starbucks or has to do with Amazon, and I think other places as well, a lot of this impulse is coming from how workers were treated during COVID, when Absolutely. It was so clear that corporate pretty much didn't care if you lived or died, as displayed by, you know, their health measures and lack thereof.
It does seem that the economy in the United States has changed so much over the past, say, maybe 3 decades, where jobs like Starbucks and some of the retail work that are the retail folks who are trying to get together, those were not considered. Working at Starbucks was considered like what a teenager does, but now
exactly
these are real, actual jobs, and it seems that the corporations haven't kept step with the fact that our economy has changed.
That's exactly the point, isn't it? A lot of jobs that when I was growing up were things, as you said, teenagers did during the summer are, for many people, their lifeblood, their career, and they have no reason to think that it would be different. You're absolutely right. And that is a fundamental shift in the US economy, and should be for these huge corporations a shift in how they perceive their workers.
Oh, well, I hope they keep adjusting their perceptions, instead of like Amazon, when we reported earlier, spent, I think it was 4.3 or 40, some amount of billions of dollars just trying to crush the Alabama union effort that happened last summer.
Well, that's the point. They are not adjusting their perceptions. Instead, they're spending millions of dollars on anti-union activity, union busting activity. And of course, the big story this week has to do with the fact that even though the Biden administration had said that they would not be giving federal contracts to companies that had been involved in union busting, they gave a $10 billion contract to Amazon, which now Bernie Sanders is trying to get dismantled. So, you know, when you see that Amazon spent over $4 million to defeat Christian Smalls, and Christian Smalls raised $120,000 on a GoFundMe page, it really makes you ask yourself, well, what was Christian Smalls doing right? And what Christian Smalls was doing right, that's so, I think, historic, is he was building deep community among the workers. He set up a folding table. He was outside the bus, near the bus stop. Workers got off that bus stop. They got on that bus stop, morning shifts, night shifts. To hear Smalls tell it, this is huge It's a kind of activism. He said it was built on love and caring. He said it was a spiritual experience. They got to know each other. They helped each other. They built community. They sang songs together. They prayed together. They smoked marijuana together. This is a force of real human connectivity and human awakening and community building that no amount of money, no amount of technology, no amount of business can ultimately defeat, because it's real. It's coming up from the bottom of things. And that's what's exciting about the reinvigoration of the labor movement. This can't be artificially created. This is organic. This is real. And then when you see the successes at places like Amazon, and when you see successes at places like Starbucks, it's clearly having this encouraging effect, this inspiring effect on people trying to unionize all over the country in all kinds of industries. And of course, social media helps with that. I think one of the other things, Julianna, that was very impactful to me, you showed that clip of my interviewing Meridian. Meridian is 17 years old. I couldn't even believe the level of sophistication and intelligent understanding of the deeper issues of labor and of unionizing that was being exhibited by these young people. I think it's an exciting moment at a time when we need exciting moments. There's so much to despair about, and it's also so important to note when new little green sprigs are coming up from the ground.
Sure. This is an area where people can see a unity across even party lines. The unions used to be demonized, and the Democrats, who were supposed to be the party of unions before, we all kind of know the history here, before they sold out to the same corporate forces that the Republicans are sold out to. Not that they were 100% great before that, but in this moment when there's so much division, unions and organized labor are places where people who might have different social values come together for the economic good of the people. To me, this seems like a really big deal. And especially what happened in West Virginia, the teachers union, who a few years ago, West Virginia is a red state, and they came out to do what used to be considered, or at least propagandized, as a blue activity, organized labor. So the fact that can you comment on the fact that this actually crosses what's being shoved down our throat as party lines?
Well, what's being shoved down our throat is the idea that the real dichotomy is left versus right. That's sort of a cover for what's really happening. The real polarity in this country is not left versus right. The real polarity is the system versus the people. And the system uses and stokes this left versus right thing so that we're looking there while they're snatching our purse over in another direction. That's what I think people are waking up to. That whether you're on the left or the right on social issues, you're being screwed economically by the same forces. And that neither party is standing up for you quite the way they should. That's why labor is so important, because labor is a different estate. It's saying we're not waiting for the government to help us here. Now, one thing we do realize is that if you have a Democratic Secretary of Labor, it's going to be better for you than if you have a Republican Secretary of Labor. It's not like there are no differences, but still neither one of them are breaking free of the neoliberal agenda. And that's why labor is so important to be a factor that pushes back unequivocally against overreach by corporate forces and in support of the workers, whether they're on the left or the right.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that you did with the working folks of Michigan when you were there?
Well, I was the minister at a non-denominational spiritual center, a church there in Warren, Michigan. And of course, we had 3,500 people coming every Sunday. And a large, probably a majority of those people were at least indirectly, if not directly, working for the auto industry. And that's what Detroit is. Detroit's an auto industry town. So I saw a lot. And one of the things that I saw that really impacted me, Julianna, was if the head of the big three, if any heads of the big three had come in and said, we are going to turn Detroit, Michigan into the world capital for the development of green energy, because what we have here in terms of skill, in terms of engineering, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of research, could make a lateral move. And instead of just promoting an industry that produces carbon, that pollutes the environment, we are going to change the purpose of this industry and the entire intentionality of our economic model to the development of green energy, I can tell you that the workers in Detroit would have been over the moon excited and energized and inspired. So that taught me a lot. That taught me a lot about where the working people of the United States are. People don't want, and I can't speak for every working person in the United States, of course, but I've seen it in industry after industry that not only do workers want to wake up in the morning and do something that contributes, that they can feel good about at the end of the day, that they're not just economic cogs in the wheel, that they're not just doing it for the money, they're doing it because they're producing something with their own skill and their own purposefulness. I think people are really rethinking what work means. People are rethinking what capitalism means. People are rethinking what business should be. Can business be a win-win? Can business be something not just on an economic level, but on every level that actually brings out the best in people to do something good with their time on this earth? I saw that up close and personal, that that's what people want. So I think that this entire reemergence of conversation and energy around labor is part of a larger conversation about what it means to not just to be a worker, but to be a citizen, and to spend our time and our days doing something that does more than make a living, make our lives worthwhile.
And dehumanize us along the way. It's
exactly,
nice.
Exactly. We want work to be exactly. And when you think about that, you go, well, I don't want my job to dehumanize me. We have to think, well, what would a real human economy be? And
Absolutely.
that means that people receive definitely more health benefits, more seniority pay, more health benefits, all of that.
It still also seems like even that is kind of not enough. I mean, if we had democratic establishments, democratic workplaces, worker co-ops like they have in many European countries, where the workers actually own and profit directly from their own work. They have a stake in the decision making. It's not like some rich guy owns it and then they're nice enough to give you health insurance or whatever, it certainly seems like having some of that in the United States, even 10% of workplaces, that would cause a competition, and people would want to all work there because the benefits would be better, the way of life would be better. And then these other corporations, the more, capitalistic structured organizations, would have to keep up with what's being offered at these other organizations. Do you think there's any place that the government might be able to encourage some form of worker-owned co-op in the workplace?
Well, I think that you can begin with the bully pulpit. You can begin with the president talking about it. You can begin with the Secretary of Labor talking about it. You can talk about the National Labor Relations Board. If that becomes the conversation that they're having, rather than this obeisance to the corporatist agenda as it is, that opens up the space. What you're talking about is so important. Americans have been trained to expect so little. And on issue after issue, whether it has to do with healthcare, whether it has to do with free education, whether it has to do with environmental protection, whether it has to do with the co-ops that you're talking about, the fact that the workers have so much more say in corporate functioning, Americans are realizing, why do we get so much less than Europeans get? How is it that other advanced democracies are able to function, not only function, but function better? And not only function better for their workers, but actually their economies are actually thriving in places where ours aren't. And so people are seeing through all this, ooh, that would be socialism propaganda. You meet these young people and they say, what am I supposed to be so afraid of with socialism? The free healthcare or the free education? Like a lot of them are saying, what has global capitalism ever done for me? And they will continue to ask those questions. And if capitalism and the corporate structure's only response to that is more union busting activity, then we're going to have a hard time in this country.
We lifted you out of poverty. Now we're going to pummel you back down into it.
Yeah, and just be happy. And be happy. Be happy. Be grateful for what we're giving you.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Marianne. I'm so grateful that we were able to take this conversation sort of even out of the bounds that are normally allowed to be discussed. We have a Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh. He used to be the mayor of Boston, if you're not, if the viewers are not familiar. And he was a labor leader for decades. And it's better to have that guy in as the Secretary of Labor than someone who is anti-labor. That obviously goes without saying, but he was the head of, I think, the Federation of Building Trade Unions, and he wanted to increase spending on infrastructure to upgrade the roads and bridges and make more jobs. But those jobs are still jobs. I mean, people need jobs, obviously, but they're still sort of within the structure of what we know, which is kind of a modern day feudalism. There's a lord, he owns things, maybe not so much with the federal jobs, but it is great to have that conversation where maybe we can even advance outside of just having organized labor be a ballast or a counterweight against corporate tyranny.
This is absolutely. It's the difference between the alleviation of distress and fundamental economic reform. We need a fundamental rethinking. We need a fundamental redesign. And like you said, in many of these areas, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at what some of our European neighbors are doing. Even when you talk about Marty Walsh, we know that Senator Sanders had pitched himself as Secretary of Labor. Right now, Sanders is out there with Kristen Smalls. He's out there at Unity Fest. He's out there with the Starbucks workers. He's out there with the Amazon workers. Where's Marty Walsh? For that matter, where's Joe Biden, Mr. Union guy, right? So but you can start with bully pulpit. It starts with changing the conversation. Right now, we are having to tinker with circumstances. But what we need to do, which I think what you're talking about now, is we need to re-envision the whole thing. Re-envision what a truly fair, a truly democratic economy would look like. And that's more than, like you said, it's more than just labor being a ballast for corporate overreach. It's labor having a seat at the table that it does not have now.
At the beginning of the show, we talked about studies around areas that have higher union memberships, that union membership actually, the studies show that union membership reduces white racial resentment, that it reduces the wage gap between men and women. It bolsters democratic participation. It bolsters the amount of working class people who actually run for government. And it certainly seems that a question for you after talking to the young people from Starbucks. Do you notice that the young Starbucks workers recognize that they are in solidarity with, say, some of the older, more traditional looking union men? I know there's a lot of union women now too, so I didn't want to put that out there, but there is this stereotype of union workers. Do you think there's this the young people feel that same sense of solidarity with workers across different?
I don't know, but I hope they do. I know I talked to some of the older people who were at the Unity Fest in Richmond, and I would say things to them like, well, we're the keepers of the story. This feels, I remember saying to some older gentlemen, this is like the 60s, isn't it? They said, yeah, it really is. And also, when you use that word solidarity, these kids really mean it. I mean, this isn't just like sloganeering. Part of what this is about is the American worker has been forced into this experience of isolation. Like it's just me and my suffering, which is part of the problem in our country, period, the sense of isolation. Being part of a union, the way things are unfolding today and the energy I saw in Richmond, and obviously what's happening at Amazon, these people feel what not just collective bargaining, but collective everything can be when you're really working with other people with common needs and common goals. And also, I want to add to what you said. I was reading an article about how in hospitals where the nurses were unionized, the healthcare results were better during the pandemic.
Fascinating. It's always great to have you here, Marianne, and I do appreciate you coming on. I do appreciate your thoughts on this area. Any final thoughts about the rising unity that we're seeing across the board in this moment of separation?
I think that America is going through a period of reckoning. We have some very serious problems on our hands. I think everybody knows that. We are under direct threat. Our democracy itself is under direct threat. We have relationship with a country that's actually uttering the word nuclear bombs in our arsenal. We have an environment that is obviously close to imploding. So I think people have been in a real understandable sense of funk and despair. I think, however, that it's time for all of us to be thinking in terms of snapping out of it. Mm-hmm. Not snapping out of it as in denying these problems, not snapping out of it as in minimizing these problems, but knowing that at a certain point you cry, you process, you reflect deeply on these things. And then there's a time when you say, okay, now it's time to get into the solution. And I think that's what this new reinvigoration of the labor movement is displaying, not just around labor, but really in terms of the state of our humanity and the state of our citizenship, that it's time to rise up and re-envision and re-articulate, reimagine and repair this country.
Well, I don't think we could be doing that without your voice. So I do appreciate you coming on here.
Right back at you.
Things. Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind. Don't forget to follow Marianne. She has a Substack Transform with Marianne Williamson that I highly recommend. Also, Marianne does a number of interviews on YouTube on her YouTube channel. Marianne, what's coming up next on your YouTube channel?
Well, I am going to be interviewing Christian Smalls on Friday. The other day, I did a wonderful interview with Peter Kalmus, climate scientist, who also talks about mindfulness and meditation, and he works at NASA. He's a wonderful embodiment of this sort of integrative, holistic activism, and you can find that at mariannewilliamson.substack.com.
Thanks so much. You're watching actTV. We'll be right back.